Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Moitrayee. I'm an engineer at Tromso. My talk today is called "How to Win Friends and Influence Developers." I know it's a big title, but hopefully by the end of it, you will win some friends and influence developers, and hopefully you'll win some friends who maybe are developers. That last part won't happen because developers don't usually have friends. Anyway, about me, a little bit about me. I've been a software engineer for about 12 years now. I've worked across different domains. I've worked at storage, I've worked in networking, did analytics for a bit, and also security. Um, I have a lot of first-hand experience with the problem that I'm about to talk about, and hopefully also be able to present some solutions too. In my free time, I really love being outdoors. I enjoy hiking. I really like skiing. I have a little girl, that's her at the bottom. She's just a bundle of mischief. She's only 16 months old, but it feels like the terrible twos are already here. And that's the picture on top is on the High Sierra Trail. I live in California, so there's always lots of fun places to go to. Let's start off with a simple, straightforward question. What is security to a developer? What role does security play in a developer's day-to-day life? It's one of the things that we have to think about, but it's not the only thing by far. When you write code, it's expected to be obviously correct, performant, reliable, and secure. Most developers work in a sprint model these days, and sprints are usually fairly short, no longer than a couple of weeks. And they're usually focused heavily on features and what's going to get delivered to customers. Security fixes are typically not accounted for or planned for, and you do them on your own time. It's not really part of a typical sprint, and it's not really planned out. So we have a problem. We need to talk. Developers like me, we do understand how important security is and why we should spend time on it. But typical AppSec tools and processes end up being really frustrating, and developers just end up ignoring security. Why is this the case? So the main problem, the biggest problem is that we keep receiving these endless lists of vulnerabilities, right? All of which need to be fixed, like right now, this very minute. As a developer, when you see a list of 1,000+ issues and they're all supposed to be important, there's a mental block that sets in right at that point. You're looking at this like veritable mountain of security debt, and it's just really easy to feel overwhelmed and just decide that you're just going to put it to the side and not do anything about it until you absolutely have to. The other problem that goes hand in hand with that is that you have these 1,000 vulnerabilities and you know that they're not all the same and that they're not all equally likely to be exploited and result in like the complete takeover of your company's environment by evil hackers. But as a developer, you really don't have a way to figure out which ones are more critical than others and which ones you should prioritize. When you get scores from most scanners, those scores are based on the severity of the vulnerability itself, and not so much on how critical it is for you in your environment. And I'll talk more about this later, but it really differs from environment to environment. One critical vulnerability is not going to be the same across all environments. The other issue is the timeline thing. That tends to really cause a problem because the timelines they don't line up. Developers get informed about issues many times well after the code is merged. And there's just this like massive context switch that you have to do to get back to addressing security issues in code that was written several weeks ago. And that, I think, for it to be something that fits into the workflow of a typical developer, it has to happen at the same time or along the same path as typical dev workflows. I'll talk more about this as well later. So the end result of all of this is that developers just get really good at ignoring and tuning out security reports. You just, you create a bunch of email filters, it just send everything to one folder, you promise yourself that you look at it soon, and then you just forget all about it. And it just gets ignored until something major happens or there's just some higher level priorities, and then you kind of say, okay, fine, I look at it, and it just doesn't really go well together. This isn't a new problem, and it's not something that hasn't been discussed before. It's unfortunately a persistent one and continues to plague a lot of companies. And it also contributes to this very adversarial dynamic that exists between dev teams and security teams. And it just causes a massive amount of frustration on both sides, because both teams just feel like they aren't being heard, and no one's really doing anything. So let's ask the big question, right? What do developers want from AppSec? I'm obviously not going to claim to represent the views of all developers in every country, in every part of the world. But I'm hoping that some of the points I present are common enough and urgent enough that most developers will agree on them. So the first thing that I think is the most important is help me prioritize, right? When you give me a list which has 1,000 issues, which ones really, truly need to be fixed? A critical vulnerability in one environment need not be critical in another. For example, you could have a bunch of critical vulnerabilities that exist in your code, but they all get built into an image that isn't being deployed anywhere currently. Or you could have a vulnerability that affects an EC2 instance that is in a closed off security group. You have rules in place, no one can reach that except for a set of IPs that you whitelist. A vulnerability like that would be lower priority than something that affects an EC2 instance that's exposed to the environment, to the internet, for example. Sometimes you have vulnerabilities that just don't have available fixes. You have some sort of upstream dependency and you can't really fix that vulnerability. All of those could be treated as lower priority than a vulnerability that's more urgent and more critical to fix. None of this is to say that those vulnerabilities are not important or they should just be ignored forever. But the main point is that when you're looking at that mountain of debt that developers always have to look at, it becomes important to sort of chip away at it slowly. And one of the most important things and useful things for a developer is to get some help in prioritizing what's really urgent. An effective AppSec tool should be able to learn about different deployment environments in your company, different build artifacts, basically what's getting built from what and where does it get deployed and how critical are those assets and environments. And then it should use that knowledge to adjust priorities, and be able to say things like, this is not as critical as something else, because in your environment it's not such a big deal. So this kind of customized ranking is what a lot of AppSec tools are missing, because they don't usually take into account your deployment environment and other factors. This is the timeline issue that we talk about. Tell me now. Don't tell me when I'm done with the code and I've pushed things out and it just becomes more expensive for me to fix these things. A typical developer workflow is you write code, you run some local tests, local tools like security linters and stuff that tell you things that are in your code right now. Then you create a PR, and then you get comments from people who review the PR. Once the PR is approved, you merge it, and at some point, all of that code is packaged into a release and deployed to production environments. And then, of course, you start the whole maintenance cycle. To be most effective, an AppSec tool should run as early as possible and should be integrated into the CI pipeline. So, for example, you run quick tests on every PR and you provide the feedback as comments in the PR. Once I have a PR created, that's where my attention is focused. So it makes sense for security feedback to also come in as part of that PR. Longer running integration tests and other dynamic analysis can be done soon after the PR is merged. And so that way I get feedback on that right after the PR is merged, but not like way into the future. So this becomes important because it avoids that unnecessary context switching that developers have to do once they've written code and they've gone off, they've moved on to the next thing, but then you have to come back and handle all of these security issues. Right, this is pretty much the same thing I mentioned. Just do quick things in the pipeline as soon as possible and do the longer running stuff later, but make sure you don't do it so far out that developers just kind of forget about that. This is another important one that is especially important for teams that collaborate on shared code repos or like large mono repos. Which vulnerabilities are relevant to me and my team? You don't want to be constantly bugged about code that you just didn't write. So an effective AppSec tool should have a directory of which teams work on which modules and which repos. Obviously, you can augment that data with like data that you get from version control systems like Git blame, and that kind of tells you these are the developers, these are the modules that they actively work on. And so if you find vulnerabilities in those modules, these are the people that should be informed about them. Keeping this data constant and not constant, sorry, accurate and current is obviously a shared effort. Teams have to commit to maintaining their data and being able to provide this accurate information to an AppSec tool. But this whole attribution of vulnerabilities to the right teams is super important because the right set of people are informed about these issues and therefore they get fixed faster. This is one of my pet peeves. Developers use so many different tools today as part of their jobs. You have GitHub, you have Slack, you have Jira, Asana for keeping track of issues. For an AppSec tool to be useful, it should fit into this workflow, and it should hopefully tell me about stuff in these tools. So I'm already using a bunch of different tools. Don't make me go to a completely different place to get vulnerability information. It's really easy for tools these days to integrate with each other. So, don't send me an email with like an attachment and then I have to click on that and then it opens up a spreadsheet and I have to look at stuff. That all of that just takes me out of the context in which I usually work in, and it just doesn't really integrate well with just my regular developer flow. So once we've reached a point where you have a bunch of vulnerabilities, hopefully the tool has helped me prioritize the ones that are super urgent and critical, and I decided to fix a bunch of them. What do I need at that point from the tool that I can that will help me fix things? Context, right? I need context about where the vulnerability was found, what kind of environment it was found in, metadata associated with that. A lot of security scanners don't usually include information about the context. They'll tell you a ton about the vulnerability itself. The CVSS core, it was here, it was found first on this day, then it was found on this day, blah, blah, blah. But none of that information actually helps me as a developer fix that issue. So the more context that a tool can provide, the more helpful it is. And I'm going to talk right after this about a tool called Sentry that a lot of developers I know use a lot, and it basically nails the context thing because it just gives you all of the information that you want. So I can't see the slides too well, but let me just, yeah, okay. So the slide on the left is, let me talk a little bit about Sentry. So I don't know if there are any Sentry folks in the audience, but if you guys are there, shout out to you guys. We love your tool. We use it all the time. Sentry is basically an application monitoring and error tracking tool. And the way it works is you integrate it into your code. And then it just runs quietly in the background, right, until you hit an error. You can set up integrations with different tools that you use. So we have an integration set up with Slack. And basically, whenever there is a problem that happens in our code, it could be an expected error, it could be an exception that's unhandled, it could be an exception that you actually want to handle, but also want to be notified about. You get a Slack message, which looks like the little thing in the top left. There's a lot of information provided in that Slack message, and you could resolve or ignore the issue right from the Slack bot. If you decide that you want to do more about it, you go into the app and then it just gives you all of the information that you need, right? So you have the stack trace, you have all the frames, you have all the variables, you have inputs that were provided, which resulted in the error happening. It has all these breadcrumbs for you to track. And then it also has a lot of information about the context, right? So you have which environment it was run in, what versions of software were used, who was the user who was logged in, what was the exact path that the user took to get to the issue. So all of that information is just so useful because as a developer, you're just making my job easier for me, right? You just come to Sentry, you find all the errors, you fix them right away. And it doesn't really take you out of your workflow. You're using tools that you're already used to using, and you're being notified of them kind of in line with your day-to-day work. So Sentry is an example of a tool that's really super user friendly, and a large part of it is because it integrates into dev workflows so seamlessly. And it's just something that developers enjoy using, and it helps make their lives easier. So really, if an AppSec tool has to kind of meet those requirements, or those fill up all of those checkboxes, it has to do all of these things, and it has to be more like Sentry. So just to summarize, I know this was a lot of information, so I'll just try to break it down a little bit more. All the points that we talked about. The most important thing from an AppSec tool is to kind of help the developer tackle that mountain of security debt that always is there in most companies. So to do that, the three most useful things that it could do is, one, it could help devs prioritize issues and help them figure out which ones are more important than others, just to help them slowly sort of chip away at that mountain and be able to prioritize which ones are more important than others. It's important for it to integrate into dev workflows, so developers don't have to kind of do completely different things to tackle security issues, but they kind of fit into the dev workflows and just get resolved as part of day-to-day work. And the other thing that is super important is to provide targeted, actionable information directly to the teams and devs that can solve these issues. That's the whole attribution thing we talked about. If you're constantly telling people about code that they either didn't write or that they don't really know what to do with, then issues just don't get resolved. I mentioned earlier I work at a company called Tromso, and we're working hard to solve some of these problems. If that sounds interesting to you, check out our website, say hello, and we'd love to hear from you. Happy to take any questions at this point. I think I have just a couple of minutes. So yeah, just feel free to ping me on the comments tab. I'm going to hang out here until 9:55 or so. I'm seeing a couple of questions about, will we get access to the slides? Yes, I believe the slides will be made available along with the video of the talk at some point after the conference. Okay, I think my time is up. Thank you so much again for your time. Thanks so much for listening. I have my LinkedIn info on the speakers page, so please feel free to connect to me, and we can keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.